Thank you. I just realized that I have become to Frog what Santa Claus is to Christmas. Something that you need to have. It's great to be back in Vienna. It's great to be back in Frog. When the committee contacted me and said, do you want to give a talk? Or I was like, oh, can't we do something else this year? It would be cool to do something more thorough, actually work with people, have some discussions. And it ended up with this workshop. And I'm super happy to host it and super happy to see so many here. You see the deck of cards you have in front of you. I was planning to have 20 people something here, so I had prepared 4 of these, and then they said, oh, you might be up to 40 people. And I was like, oh my God, I need to, my son was very happy though, because he got to make more cards, and I had to pay him for that, so it comes out of my budget. This is the program for today. I'm going to start by giving a sort of 45-minute talk. There will be, if you have listened to me before, some things will be new. You will recognize something. Basically, the idea is to draw out some headlines about game-based learning and how educational game design works as a craft. Then we're going to have a short coffee break, and then we start the main part, which is the first workshop, where we're going to work with a technique called classification card games. We have lunch, and then we come back for a shorter workshop where we work with another game, and then we have a general discussion. And I'm here all day if you want sort of to discuss something one-on-one. Sounds good to you? Yeah? Okay, good. And everybody can hear me? Okay? Okay. So, this is supposed to be a drawing of the high school teacher Al Frisbee. Al Frisbee was a teacher who lived in a school in the United States, in one of the states or in one of the districts where they were opting out of Darwinism, meaning that Darwinism wasn't no longer mandatory in the curriculum. And Al Frisbee thought that that was a really bad thing. He wanted to teach it, but now he couldn't motivate all students because they could just say, it's not in the curriculum, we don't need to listen to this. So what he did was that he created a game. He took toothpicks, and he painted some toothpicks blue and some toothpicks green. And then he took all of his students out on a grassy field. He threw out the toothpicks on the grassy field, and he gave some students a spoon and some students a fork. And then he said, now you shall pick up the toothpicks, but you can only use the tool that you have in hand. And then afterwards, they took statistics on whether a student had collected green mostly, or whether the students collected mostly green or blue toothpicks, and whether the students with forks or spoons were most successful. What do you think the result was? Do you think they found more green than blue toothpicks? Probably more blue. That's absolutely what happened. Do you think the people with the forks had an easier time on the grassy field, or the spoon? Actually, the forks worked better. Yeah, because the spoons were, I don't know how they were made. So, Al Frisbee said in the debriefing to his students, the toothpick symbolizes prey. You are the predators. Forks get to eat, blue toothpicks get eaten. That's the theory of the survival of the fittest, in a nutshell. So he used the game as a metaphor to illustrate basic Darwinism. And if you ever have been in one of these activities where someone uses experiential learning, it's really hard to forget. I love them. I love these things. You know, I've been in a couple of them, and I really still can remember them. So I think it's great. I do personally prefer non-digital games when it comes to learning. I do think we have an opportunity with digital games, but I'm a bit hesitant with digital games. I'm a bit like Bono, you know, the singer in U2. Like, I still haven't really found what I'm looking for. I think it's out there, but so far I find non-digital games to be excellent when you teach things in the spirit of Al Frisbee. So what do I do at my university? Well, I host courses in something that we call educational game design. This subject can go on many terms. Sometimes it's called game with a purpose, sometimes it's called serious games, and so on and so forth. Basically, this is what I teach students to do. Here are a couple of student projects. We don't necessarily, we don't have the opportunity to teach any tools. We can't teach them Unity. I work at sort of a teacher training university, so we don't have that. But if they know a digital tool when they enter the class, they are allowed to make digital games. Here, for instance, is a math game some students did, where you are in a fantasy world and you have a deck of cards, and the deck of cards is your weapon. So you're supposed to fight monsters by doing different calculations. Now, the interesting design part of this game is that it kind of hacks this leveling system. In many leveling systems in modern video games today, you have like a reversed learning curve. Like the game is so much harder in the beginning, and then leveling kicks in and it becomes easier. Do you recognize this? Like if you have played games like The Witcher, it's really, really hard in the first level. So what they did here is that the decks that you get later on in the game are way more powerful at defeating monsters. Okay? They do more damage when you get the correct answer. However, the math is also way, way harder. You see? So when you level, not only do you get empowered in the story of the game, you also have to solve harder math. Here's an analog game some student, or actually one student did. It's probably the only one that was released for commercial purposes. It's called The Hard War, a two-player game that illustrates the role of media in warfare. So the game really sort of first leads you to fight in a general manner, but on the backside of every card it says how many civilian casualties your attack had, and then you can expose the other player to the media, and if the reported number of civil casualties in the whole game reaches over 200,000, then everybody's cards are turned around and the person with the most civil casualties lose the game. So it's a game that sort of discusses, highlights media, and it really sort of brings you to this, oh, like I'm gonna attack, and sort of. So you feel really bad playing it. It's not a fun game, but it's a game that makes you reflect on things. So I love this stuff. I think it's really fun to make. I'm gonna show you how to do it. But as a professor, we always have to think about this. What about the research then? What does the research say? What do we know about game-based learning? And to be honest, if we look at the literature reviews that are currently out there, this is one that came out, I think it's 2 years ago, 2015, by Elizabeth Boyle's research group in Scotland. They did, 2016 it's from, so it's really, really current. They actually did 2 research overviews. You can find them online. This one that I'm going to just show you and highlight some results from is the one where they look at primary education. They also did one with all forms of educational levels. So what they did was that they wanted to look at sort of the current state of the research, and of course they did a lit review, and they did sort of a search string with different kinds of topics such as digital game-based learning, and so on and so forth. And they also had some criteria. They wanted to include empirical evidence. It had to be empirical evidence, empirical bad. It had to be in primary education. It had to be between 2000 and 2013, and it had to have some form of relation to a specific curricular subject. And this is sort of the first thing that they found. So they found 18,000 articles, and then when they started to use these criteria that I talked about, it boiled down to 105. Out of these 105, they wanted to measure them whether they had good quality or not, so they made this kind of matrix for how to evaluate it, where they stressed that some of these studies were based on quality, whether they were generalizable, what kind of methods were used, and so on. And they gave each paper a score between 1 and 9. And after having done that, it ended up with 45 papers that measured 9 or above. And here you can see the different kind of genres they found. You can find all of this in the paper. What I want to stress here is sort of the actual relation, that it boils down to 45 high-quality papers in the whole world. I'm going to come back to that. If you look at the kind of study designs, there are like quasi-experimental, service, and 16 randomized control trials. Right? For those of you who don't know it, randomized control trials is sort of considered the gold standard of scientific research, and the reason for that is that if you're going to test whether one group or another group, if something has an effect, it's really good to randomize both the treatment group and the control group. For instance, say you want to test a medicine and the effects of the medicine, and in one group you have volleyball athletes, and the other group you have seniors at the retirement home. You see the problem there? Like whatever effect you're going to get will probably have to do with so many other variables. So that's why you randomize, and that's why you also need a large population. So out of this, it boils down to 16 RCT studies in the whole world. The results also shows that most studies is done, the one I think is PC games, and they separated between this approach that we call commercial off-the-shelf, where you just take a game that's out there, that's not deliberately designed for learning, and games that are specifically made for learning. And most of the research currently seems to be made on games that are deliberately made for learning, and as you can see, mostly for the PC console. Here are some ideas of what subjects STEM, like social technology, engineering, math, are overrepresented. There are most studies in these subject areas. Social sciences, history, entertainment. Yeah, you can find it online, but the main takeaway is that maths and science are sort of the big part where we seem to study game-based learning. So how about then the RCT studies? What did they show then? Well, out of the 16, 7 RCT studies reported positive learning results when you compare the game-based learning approach to a traditional. 3 of those were in mathematics, 1 was looking on social issues, 1 in nutritional knowledge, and 2 positive studies looking at a variety of subjects. There were 2 RCT studies that reported negative learning, that you actually learned worse from using game-based learning than to other forms of approaches, and those were in science. The rest of the 7 studies didn't show any significant differences. Now, the main takeaway I think we should learn from this is, first of all, that there is a huge discrepancy between the overwhelming discourse on game-based learning and what we actually know. So this is what it boils down to out of 18,298 articles. So the main takeaway here, we have a lot of talk about game-based learning, but we know quite little about it. So should we despair then? No, not at all. That's not my point here. It might be that the idea is not, because when you do effect studies, you always end up in this kinds of results, and it's really, really hard to say something general. However, if we look at one of the studies that finds results, what can we see then? Here is probably what I think is one of the best and most thorough studies about game-based learning. It's not done in primary education. This is for higher education. It's done in political science, so it's for university students. And the researchers, Nikishava and Jäger, they were teaching a course in political science. And in this course, the students were having an article by a researcher called Mankur Olson. And so the content of the whole game was Mankur Olson's 1993 article. And that article is about the incentive structure of anarchy, authoritarianism, democracy in relation to economic development. So what the researchers did was that they created a digital game that simulated some ideas that Manker-Olson has in this paper. Are you following? Yeah? Okay. Please, if something is unclear, please interrupt. And what they did was that then they randomized it, so they had some students coming to a morning session. No, some students coming to like between 2 and 3 session, and other students coming between 3 and 4 session. And the setup was, of course, they were saying that this was because of the room is too small or something. They didn't tell the students that they want to get different treatments. All students had read the article. In the control group, the students got a general kind of lecture, a debriefing about it, and then had a discussion about it. In the treatment group, the students also got a bit of lecture, but they also got to try the game for 1 hour, sitting in groups like you are sitting now, and were able to discuss meanwhile. Okay? After that, they did a post-test where they asked questions like this: how are the conditions that bring about strong democracy related to those that bring about economic growth? From the perspective of Olson, why is anarchic violence so bad? So you see, it all has to do about rather deep and thorough knowledge about what's the point of this article. 4 of the questions were mimicked were actually represented in the game. So these are the ones represented in the game, and 2 questions weren't represented in the game. Are you following the design of the study? So directly after they had done the lecture or the game-based part, this is the result on the different questions. I should say that they were independently graded by a sort of a large committee of graders, and they all were calculated a mean average in relation. So it's not just one person who had been sitting there. Also, the graders had no idea whether the paper that they were grading had been in the control group or the treatment group. That goes without saying. As you can see, there are almost no significant differences. Like, they performed equally good or equally bad. I don't know what this is, but they performed very equally directly after. However, and this, I think, is sort of really interesting, and one thing that we miss when we talk about game-based learning. They did a delayed post-test 3 weeks later, and there we can see this result. The treatment group, in the 4 questions that the game simulated, performed significantly better. So they memorized Manker-Olson's article way better than the other group. They were able to gain another level of deep learning. And for me, this really, really shows the potential of game-based learning. Because if you have been in this kind of experiential learning activities, you can use it, draw upon it, and use it for your memory in order to come back and sort of use it when you try to understand this phenomena again. So, before I continue, what can be the takeaway in relation to the research? I think that, first of all, we need to have modest expectations. Like, life isn't a TED talk. We're not going to change the world with game-based learning, but we can do some pretty neat stuff with it. We also sometimes must ask if the results are worth the effort. A recent Swedish study by Björn Berg Marklund, or recent, it came out 1.5 years ago, I think. He shows, like, he raises the question, well, we might see like 10-15% increase in result, but what he saw, at least when implementing digital games, was that the effort of doing it was so high. So you have to ask yourself, is it really worth the effort? Is it worth the effort on behalf of everything you need to do, the infrastructure you need to build, and so on and so forth? However, I think we should all have in mind that the unique possibilities might not always be relating to the learning outcome or learning the same thing as we can with other methods. Instead, we can gain new kind of learning processes about new subject matters. For me, game-based learning is very much about gaining deeper understanding of systems and these kinds of metaphorical experience, but they're also highly motivational. And if something is more motivational and fun, why shouldn't we do it even if it's not having any effects, as long as it's worth, as long as the effort is reasonable. Okay, are you ready to go forward? Do you feel that you know everything about the research on game-based learning now? No, I have failed you. But at least you know where to look, and you can keep on looking in this direction. So, how do you then get it right? What do I tell my students back home in Gothenburg? The problem with educational game design is that there are a billion ways of shooting yourself in the foot and getting it wrong. And one problem we have is something called a Ludo pedagogical dissonance. That means that the stuff that you do in the game and the stuff that you are doing in the game doesn't have to resonate with the stuff that you learn. This concept comes from I'm super sorry, it's my game group who wants to set up a meeting. Actually has sort of a problematic relation to the content, so that basically the educational content can sometimes just be a kind of skin that you put on the game in a sense. And this is mainly a problem when the game is supposed to represent something that we want the player to learn. Sorry for me misspelling that. So this is a digital game called The Kingdom of Sweden. It's kind of ancient. This is a game where you simulate Swedish history from 1520 to 1800 when we elect a king. You play as a noble family in Sweden and you try to get points by recruiting historical celebrities, then you get facts here. But there is also kind of a small fighting element in the game. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's like kind of chess-like strategic turn-based gaming. And this is from my very, very early research. But this is they are 9-year-old, they are playing Frederick and Daniel, they are playing Svea rike, meaning the Kingdom of Sweden, and they are going to go into a battle. And this is how their talk goes. Frederick, a battle. Oh, are we going to war? Use horses. No, you have to place them in rows. And he points to the screen. Put the horses here, they are setting up for the battle. There, and horses. Let's place them. Yes. Maybe just a little further ahead, and they keep on planning their attack. Just use all horses. Okay. Take two more men. Let's use all. Okay. And then Frederick becomes silent, ponders, and he says, I wonder which countries that are going to war. No idea. Sweden against some other fat country. So they are playing through the game without having any idea what's being represented. And of course that is a severe problem when you want to create games for learning, that they can handle the game system, have fun with the game system, but the representation that you wanted them to sort of have a cognitive relation to escapes. Let me illustrate this. We should live as in learn. Let me illustrate this by having you guys play a game. Everybody knows rock, paper, scissors? Okay? Warm up by playing a really, really fast turn of rock, paper, scissors. Count points for each time someone wins. The game is over when someone reaches 4 points. Grab someone that you can see in the room. Okay, let's get going. Okay. You don't have anyone? Ah. 2-1. 3-1. Ah, I win. Okay. Now you're going to get to play some more. Let's do a small iteration to the rules. You're going to play one more round. Play rock, paper, scissors. Let's count points for each time someone wins a turn. When winning after having used scissors, you score 2 points instead. Okay? You follow? Okay, let's go. There you go. Okay. Three. Ah, no, 3-3. No, oh, 5-3. Okay, okay. Even if you're not done, you can do this at the coffee break. It's kind of a fun game. What happens? You do a super small iteration to the rule. What happens? Well, you start to think like this, like, oh, it's stupid to choose paper because if I lose, she gets 2 points, so I take rock. On the other hand, she might be thinking that as well, so maybe I should go for paper. But she knows that, so scissors might be. So you start to think strategically. In some sense, action and communication changed. Like the first round, everybody was, oh, rock, paper, scissors. Yeah, this is going to be fun. And then when I said the new rules, everybody was like, whoa. And you were a bit more silent. Something were at stake. So actually what happened was that a new learning process is started. If you were to play this for a long time against the same opponent, you would learn the other person's strategies. If it's a meta player that goes for a lot of paper, or if it's like a daredevil who tries scissors all the time. So the first conclusion here is that a game experience is extremely sensitive to the rules of the games. Like the whole universe of meaning can be completely altered by extremely small rule changes. If you play an MMO, like if you play, for instance, World of Warcraft, you can see on forums like, oh, they took down the druids' damage per second by 0.03%. I'm never going to touch that game again. It's going to completely change the game balance. So basically, rules dictate your actions, cognitions, and also your perceptual focus, what you do. And learning is always a side effect of what you do. So the learning outcome can be ruined or facilitated by extremely small changes in the rule system. Okay, we're going to play one more. Do you want to play one more round? Okay, we're going to play now the Lord of the Rings version of rock, paper, scissors, and that is called axe, sword, bow. So you do, these are the symbols. Every Viking knows that the axe beats the sword because you can't parry. The sword is better than the bow. This is the axe. The sword, this is supposed to be the edge. The sword beats the bow because I say so. And the bow beats axe because it's ranged, okay? So this is the game system. Everybody get an idea? Okay. But I'm just gonna... No. No, 2-0 to you. I just need to. No, you win. Okay, I think we can break. Again, you will get to the opportunity to try it. And so now we did another iteration to the game. What happened? I think that your thinking went something like that. Did axe beat bow or did bow beat axe? Your actions. Screw this, I do something and see if I win. Communication. Did you get the point or did I win? And your learning process is changed. You needed to learn the system as in itself. You needed to learn the gestures. So we can draw some more conclusions here. Like the game system as such, and this is a problem for game-based learning, tends sometimes to become the main learning objective. And so basically, you make a game to represent something about the world, but the main takeaway for the learners is the actual game system or the simulation. And that is a problem. Like I had the opportunity to go with a crew in a tank for a full day at a military exercise, and they were implemented laser tag technology. Do you know laser tag? Yeah, laser tag technology on a military scale. So they had tanks with laser tracks. How cool was that? However, and the soldiers had it, and they had these sensors so they could take on data on every single ballistic projectile fired during the whole military exercise. However, when talking to the men, they were saying that, well, the thing is that we have learned if you aim a bit lower, it's better. You also could see how they had these sensors that picked up the laser on their helmets, and they use this bush and bushes as camouflage, and they put it in front of that because then it might help them a little bit. Well, that protects really good against light, guys, but a real bullet won't help if you put some birch in your helmet. And also, like a captain were yelling at them because one crew have one of another tank crew by firing a ballistic projectile through some trees, or actually they have fired light. You can fire light through this group of tree, but it wouldn't work with a real ballistic projectile. So they had sort of hacked the system. So what these soldiers were doing was they're learning the rules of the simulation, and that is, of course, a problem, because we need to be aware of that. We introduce some new learning tools. They aren't transparent. They aren't just something that you can take in, that they introduce new problems to the learners to handle. And most importantly, perceptually, we attend to the things that matter in the rule system, or what I call the ludified meaning of the representations. I promise you that even if I had wonderful eye candy anno 1999 here, your eyes were up here, because this is what matters in the rules. Okay? And this is the problem when you create something. This is severe Ludo pedagogical dissonance, because you are looking up here. This is the rule system, and the fact that this was supposed to represent some form of warfare was completely oblivious to most of us. So, okay. I also think it's important when we talk about game-based learning to know that there are at least two ways of framing educational games. I won't go so far into it here, but like we can think of education as sort of being based on individual learning trajectories, where we say that where we think of sort of mainly in constructivist learning theories. How many of you are educators here? Yeah, most of you. So then you know what constructivism is, I guess. The idea is basically, well, it's a good, okay approach as long as they learn something. We shouldn't always have predefined learning outcomes as long as they develop. And this is an approach you can use if you have after-school clubs, camps, educational games used in home environments. If someone sits and play an educational game at home, whether they learn a specific curricular object or not, might not be the most interesting as long as they learn something. Makes sense. But then we also have education based on a specific learning trajectory, where you want instruction to happen. And I think this is where we have the challenge, because in some regard you always learn something from most things in life. But when you actually have the idea that someone must learn this topic, where you have a predefined learning outcome, and that is, of course, the goal of formal education. Okay, I will soon start to wrap up. Let me just point out a couple of things. According to, and enter sort of the world of design, according to the game designer Richard Rouse, he has a classical book on game design. It's simply called Game Design Theory and Practice. He stresses that game design process can start in three different, you can approach game design from three different angles. You can start in the story saying, I want to make a game about Vikings. You can start in the fiction. You can start in the rules saying, oh, I have this really interesting bidding mechanic or auction mechanic. I want to make a game based on that. That is typically how European board gamers sort of, they have an interesting mechanic, and then they dress it up in a team. Or you can start in the technology. You can say, I want to make a game for Kinect. I want to make a game for tablets or so. And you start in that, or in an approach. Now, what I find very, very important is that in educational game design, we have a fourth dimension. We have the educational content, at least if you take the instructional approach. And that creates a paradox. since you not only have three dimensions, but actually the idea that in this design process I should have someone to learn something, educational game design is actually harder than ordinary game design. And the paradox is that educational game design is often done by less experienced game designers. And that is a paradox that we need to handle. So, but I think everybody who's doing educational games should be proud and aware of that you're actually doing the most hardest form of educational games. I also think it's important to stress that we need to think of at least two forms of educational games. So these are student games here. This is a card game based on Magic the Gathering. Does that make sense to you? An ancient game where you play cards, two players against each other. And in Magic the Gathering you have sorcerers and you have to feed them or give them mana from a mana pool in order for them to be able to activate their abilities. Now, this is called grammar magic. So you have these different creatures and they are fed words of the correct class. So some of them need nouns, some of them need verbs and so on. That makes sense? Okay. I've heard that German grammar is really, really hard. So I have no idea, I don't speak German, but maybe something. And that is one way of approaching it, where the content has a very specific relation to the rule. I will come back to that. This is another game made by some students. This is the board game called The Board Game. The idea is that it's a game where you start and there are people sitting around the table in a board at a board meeting. And the idea is that your goal is to get your pawns of your color. You can have blue, black, red, or so on, to get them into the board. So you should create a more diverse management board than it is in there. And this is based on Gramsci's idea of hegemonic structures. These students wanted to do that, so it's a highly political game. And the system is rigged, so no matter how hard you try, the hegemony will always happen again. You can't really get the people that are in there out of the board. It will recreate, and the learning outcome is supposed to be that in order for you to change this, you need to actually change the system. So if ever a revolution happens in Sweden, blame me and my students. Now, however, and this is of course a very, very different way of building a game. And we can use, so in the first one, the content is related to the game challenge in that way that by interacting with the rules, you are exposed to the content. What I'm saying is that you are forced into learning. The rules are built in such a way that you cannot avoid learning something if you want to face the challenge. The only way to not learn is to stop actually playing the game if it's appropriately designed. However, in the second one, the rules are representing the educational content. You want to learn the system. So you build a system that illustrates something. So what I'm saying is that in the first approach, the mechanics forces you to learn. Learning is a side effect of interacting with the rules. The rules can be invisible. It doesn't matter whether you see or understand the rules here. They can have a ludopedagogical dissonance. It's not the end of the world. Like you are learning about grammar, but at the same time you are playing a game with monsters. It's not a problem if there is a dissonance with this approach. They are also suitable for a variety of contexts. Sometimes we call them frame games because they can be a frame where you can put in a lot of different content. However, they can also be sensitive to short circuits. If there are ways that you can handle the challenge without cognitively exposing you to the content, you're going to take that detour. They are very, very sensitive to design. For instance, if you build in a trial and error system, students are going to use trial and error instead of doing the more cognitive challenging thing that is to understand the content and unpack it. Approach 2, there we can say that the mechanics is the message, as Brenda Romero said, like you learn by reflecting upon the system or your own behavior in the system. The rules should be visible because the rules are the content. Like in Al Frisbee's case, the whole idea is to understand the different conditions that are out there. They cannot have a ludopedagogical dissonance. Then you're going to miss the whole point. And they are very suitable for system thinking and moral dilemmas and that kind of learning. And what I'm going to show you today, we're going to soon have coffee, is this approach. We're going to talk about education based on a specific trajectory where we have something, we want to learn X, and we're going to use the approach where we build a structure where we, as a side effect, by interacting with the mechanics, are forced to learn. Should you, however, be in town next Tuesday, I am hosting workshops at the opening of the Future Learning Lab at the Teacher College here, and then I will have a workshop about the other approach. Okay, anybody plan to come there? Good, good. Where? How do we get information? I don't know. Katrina, is it full? Maybe it's full already.
No, it's not full. You're very welcome.
Yeah, talk to Katrina. She is the host of this wonderful event. So now we need to take a break. I'm sorry I'm 2 minutes over time, but take 15 minutes break and then we get starting with some interactive exercises. We will have a discussion. You will get the opportunity to ask questions, but we have it all in the end. If you have anything for me now, please come forward during the coffee. Okay?